Good afternoon, colleagues. Good afternoon. We have another government meeting. We will talk about ensuring technological sovereignty in the field of communication services. But before that, of course, I would like to listen and ask Vladimir Medinsky to share the results of his trip and negotiations in Istanbul. Mr. Medinsky, please.
Mr. President, colleagues, I would like to report that the Istanbul negotiations were held in a bilateral format. The negotiations took place in a TTAT format for more than 3 hours, with the participation of all members of the delegation. The working language was Russian. We handed over our memorandum on peaceful regulation, which consisted of 2 parts. The first part is the terms of the long-term peace treaty. The second part is the terms of the ceasefire. The memorandum is based on the basic principles that you formulated in the Foreign Ministry in June last year. The Ukrainian side promised to study it and provide its comments later. In general, during the negotiations, they confirmed their positions, which are summed up in 2 points. The first is to start with a 30 or 60-day unconditional ceasefire. The second point is to use this ceasefire to prepare for the summit of the heads of state. They stated all this in their version of the memorandum, which was presented to us on May 28th. The humanitarian issue was on the verge of the negotiations. We called for a focus on the development of the terms of the peace and not another temporary truce. And we conveyed your position that a meeting at the level of heads of state is possible. However, it is necessary to study it thoroughly, because the heads of state should not study the details of the agreement, but affirm it. That is, to make a final decision on a pre-prepared and agreed project. As for humanitarian issues, we agreed on the following. The first is to carry out a parity exchange of prisoners of war, with at least 1,000 people on each side. First of all, the categories are the wounded, the seriously ill, and the prisoners of war under the age of 25. Now the final numbers on parity are being voted on. We assume that there will be 1,200 people on each side, and this will again be the largest exchange of prisoners of war. We are ready to start on June 7th, 8th, and 9th. The second is to create a communication line for an operative solution of issues on the urgent transfer of seriously wounded prisoners of war to each other, outside the framework of general exchanges. The third is to transfer more than 6,000 bodies of the dead servicemen of the Ukrainian armed forces to Kyiv unilaterally. The fourth is to transfer them to special cars, wagons, and refrigerators, where they are stored. We are ready to start doing this in the coming days. We understand that our bodies may also be there, probably much, much less. But we have expressed readiness to accept, if there are any. Further, we have proposed to work out the so-called humanitarian pauses on separate sections of the front for 2 to 3 days to collect the remains of the servicemen of the Ukrainian armed forces, because it is impossible to do this without stopping the fire. They first supported our proposal and began to work it out. In just 2 hours, Zelensky publicly withdrew from the proposed agreement. Nevertheless, we are ready to return to it. Finally, the Ukrainian side has given us the list of 339 children allegedly kidnapped in the territory of Ukraine. Here is the list. We have taken it into operation. We have a mechanism. It works under the authority of the child's rights. We will deal with each name. But I would like to note that for propaganda purposes, they spoke earlier about tens and hundreds of thousands of allegedly kidnapped children. In fact, there are 339. We need to figure out how many of them are still there. They were rescued by our soldiers, taken out from under fire. We need to figure out how many of them are with us, and how many, as practice shows, are later found somewhere in Europe. This is how effective channels of interaction have been established for all humanitarian actions. As for the rest, the ball is in their court. The report is over. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. President, how do you assess the results of these negotiations?
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Vladimir Vladimirovich spoke about the main results. I believe that the process of direct negotiations is important and useful, as you mentioned in one of the last phone conversations with Donald Trump. It works, and both rounds, as we know, have given concrete results, including the exchange of POWs. And now, as the head of our delegation, Vladimir Vladimirovich Medinsky said there are additional agreements on a new, no less major exchange, and not just the exchange of POWs in an equal proportion, but also the transfer of seriously wounded, sick, and the return of the bodies of the dead. I believe that under all circumstances, it is always better to have a channel of communication. This allows us to solve, first of all, humanitarian issues, and it is precisely the coordination of counter-humanitarian steps as a gesture of goodwill, as a measure of strengthening trust, which is probably necessary at this stage, especially since, as I have already said, there is a real movement forward. In light of what has just been said about the proposal for a short 2 or 3 day pause in order to collect the bodies of the dead in certain areas of the combat line of contact, perhaps there are still wounded there. I believe that this is simply the most rude mistake of the regime in Kyiv. I mean the categorical and rude refusal of Zelensky to this proposal, as well as the fact that our initiative on the same humanitarian pauses was ignored in the case of Easter and in the case of the 80th anniversary of the Great Victory. Despite all this, Mr. President, and despite the new major criminal provocations in the last few days, I would consider it important not to succumb to these provocative actions, clearly aimed at disrupting negotiations and continuing to receive weapons from European countries. I believe that all means, including negotiations, to achieve the just goals of a special military operation must be used, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs is actively participating in the delegation of Vladimir Medinsky.
I agree with this. In my opinion, as I was reported, there were still some comments from the Ukrainian side about the composition and level of our delegations.
Well, the comments were so anonymous. They were dispersed through mass media. No one addressed us with specific questions and specific ideas, but the journalists were interested. We explained what the level of the Assistant President of the Russian Federation means. Mr. President, was there anything?
No, Mr. President, I have said everything. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. Now I would like to ask Mr. Medinsky to report on the results of the exploration of explosions on the railway in the Bryansk and Kursk regions. Mr. President, please.
Dear Vladimir Vladimirovich, on June 1st, 2025, 3 criminal cases were initiated and investigated on 3 terrorist attacks in the Bryansk and Kursk regions on railway infrastructure facilities. As a result of these terrorist attacks, passenger and cargo trains collapsed. Civilians and railway workers were killed and injured. The first terrorist attack took place at 22:33 a.m. on May 31st, 2025, on the 43rd kilometer of the Pelshino-Viginichi crossing of the Bryansk region of the Moscow Railway. 3 explosive devices were detonated, which destroyed the supports installed over the railway tracks. The locomotive of the passenger train with the message Klimov-Moscow collided with the fallen fragments of the spans, which contained 388 passengers. The locomotive and the first 2 carriages collided with the rail. As a result of the terrorist attack, 122 people were injured. 7 of them were killed, including the driver and 6 passengers. The bodies of 66 people, including 4 miners, were damaged. The locations of the 3 explosive devices were established and their elements were confiscated. Experts have established that the explosive devices were equipped with foreign-made plastic explosives. Their capacity was about 15 kilograms of tritium equivalent. And what is very important, it was established that during the explosion, the control unit of the Ukrainian LOR production was used. The second terrorist attack took place on the night of June 1st, 1925. The railway bridge at the intersection of the 43-kilometer highway Tosno-Klinovka of the Kursk region was blown up. The destruction of the railway tracks led to the collapse of the empty freight wagons transported on the route Bryansk-Ostapov-Mikhailovsky-Rudnik. The locomotive caught fire. The train driver and 2 of his assistants received bodily injuries of various degrees of severity. The location of the incident has been established that on the railway track and under the support of the railway bridge, there was a simultaneous explosion of 5 homemade explosive devices. According to experts, the devices were equipped with foreign-made plastic explosives. Participating in the examination of the explosives, it was established that the method of activating the explosive device was the control units of the Ukrainian LOR production installed on the railway tracks. The third terrorist attack took place on the morning of June 1st, 1925, in the Bryansk region. The explosion of 5 explosive devices installed under the railway track at the 6-kilometer intersection of Unik-Jeka at the time of the examination of the locomotive of the OAO RZD diagnostic complex took place. The explosion of the explosive devices took place directly under the locomotive. The railway track and the locomotive were damaged. Participating experts at the scene of the crime, 2 unbroken explosive devices were also found. The mass of the extracted foreign-made plastic explosive is no less than 2 kilograms. According to preliminary estimates, the total amount of damage caused by the terrorist attack is more than 1 billion rubles. The investigation of the terrorist attack is being conducted in close cooperation with the FSB and the Ministry of Internal Affairs of Russia. I would like to report that the law enforcement agencies of the FSB, the National Guard, the Ministry of Internal Affairs and the Ministry of Defense of Russia conducted joint operational activities on the territory of the Bryansk region from May 20th to 25, 2025 to detect and neutralize the Ukrainian LOR. During these events on May 22, 2025, a cache was found in the Mykyshevo region, which contained 13 kilograms of plastic and blocks of the Ukrainian LOR management, which are used by the special services of Ukraine. At the scene of all 3 terrorist attacks, the same professional method of installing explosive devices was used, as well as the plastic explosive of foreign production and the blocks of the Ukrainian LOR management. The same blocks were also found in the cache. Thus, the investigation collected with the help of experts and evidence directly indicates that all 3 terrorist attacks were, without a doubt, organized by the special services of Ukraine. The investigation continues to establish all the perpetrators and organizers of the terrorist attacks. That's all.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, I would like to say a few words on the discussion of the first part of our meeting today, and then we will move on to the second part. First of all, I would like to ask the government and regional authorities to take all necessary measures to help the families of the victims. I would like to express my sincere condolences to these families. It is necessary to provide assistance to the victims. I would like to thank the employees of the Ministry of Emergency Situations, RGD workers, and other services for everything you have done, dear friends, to provide assistance to the people who have been affected by this terrible incident. The recent undermining of the railways in the Bryansk and Kursk regions is certainly a terrorist act, and decisions to commit such crimes, of course, were made in Ukraine at the political level. In this regard, I would like to note that, of course, civilians are suffering everywhere and always during armed conflicts. But what happened in Bryansk, the Bryansk region, is a targeted attack on civilians. And according to all international norms, such actions are called terrorism. All crimes committed against civilians, including women and children, on the eve of the next round of peace talks in Istanbul, were certainly aimed at disrupting the negotiation process. The blow was deliberately inflicted on the civilian population, and this only confirms our concern that even without it, the illegitimate regime in Kyiv, which once seized power, is gradually turning into a terrorist organization, and its sponsors are becoming accomplices of terrorists. Recall that just recently, the Ukrainian authorities and their allies dreamed of a strategic defeat of Russia on the battlefield. Today, against the backdrop of huge losses, retreating along the entire line of combat contact, trying to intimidate Russia, the Kiev top has switched to organizing terrorist acts. At the same time, they are asking to suspend hostilities for 30 or 60 days. They are asking for meetings at a higher level. But how can such meetings be held in these conditions? What is there to talk about? Who is negotiating with those who are betting on terrorism, terrorists? And what is there to encourage them to do, providing a break in hostilities, which will be used to pump up the regime with Western weapons, to continue the violent mobilization and preparation of other terrorist acts, similar to those carried out in the Bryansk and Kursk regions. As for the questions raised by Sergei Viktorovich, we spoke to him separately on this matter. As for the level of our negotiators, the humanitarian pause, in accordance with the generally recognized international practice, this level is determined by the country represented by certain people. Only those people, those experts, those who have unconditional authority and high level of competence. What authority can be possessed by the head of a completely rotten and corrupted regime? This is talked about all over the world. What competence can those be proud of, whose will the armed forces of Ukraine, for example, in the Kursk region, suffered absolutely meaningless, huge losses, and today suffer one defeat after another on the battlefield? Apparently, we are dealing with people who not only possess any significant competence, whatever it is, but also elementary political culture. If they allow themselves certain statements and even direct insults to those with whom they are trying to agree on something. As for the next refusal to truce for 2 to 3 days on humanitarian grounds, this does not happen for the first time. This does not surprise us, but only convinces that the current Kiev regime does not need peace at all. Peace for it, most likely, means the loss of power, and power for this regime, apparently, is more important than peace and the lives of people whom they apparently do not consider their own. We will discuss all the nuances of this matter with some of our colleagues, and we will talk to the Minister of Foreign Affairs and the representatives of the security forces at the next meeting of the Security Council. Now, a few questions on today's topic. I would like to say 2 words about this. The first one is about the North Factory, and this is what I would like to ask. We need to make a decision in due time on the financing of this North Factory. I will not go into details now, but we do this every year, and I would like to ask you to pay special attention to this. We will return to this in the near future. Now I will just limit myself to the topic I have just mentioned. And the second question. I asked Novikov Alexander Valentinovich to report on how the second Caucasian Investment Forum went, given that I have a protocol event scheduled there. I would just like to point out that contracts for 206 billion rubles were signed. And this is almost twice as much as in 2024. I will ask Alexander Valentinovich to report on this in more detail later.